alhamdulillah, that it seems that a lot of people are, really coming to know about the Usuli Institute and interested in what we're doing. And so I'm really excited to, welcome people. And I think it bears repeating just, what we do here, so people who are not really familiar with the Usuli Institute can know. Basically, we are a relatively new nonprofit organization. We have 501c3 status, and we are an educational institute. We are dedicated to elevating knowledge and elevating critical thinking, and particularly with regard to Islamic law and Sharia and Islamic jurisprudence. And we do that through what we call the Usuli method, which is basically an interpretation or an approach or a school of thought, if you will, where we start with the fundamentals of our faith, the Quran and the Sunnah and the Islamic intellectual tradition, and then we delve into that tradition and try and investigate and extract the moral lessons and the moral principles of our faith. And then we take those and we apply them to our modern day context, so that Islam becomes a very vibrant, meaningful, relevant, and humanistic engagement with the divine. So this is, what when we go in and we say, what is the moral? We have to take into consideration our current context and what is meaningful for us in our day and age. Assalamu alaikum, come on in. So the piece that I often, alhamdulillah, I get a chance to sort of talk about some of my passions at the beginning of each of these halaqas. And I am not a scholar, as I've mentioned, but I like to tell some stories and share some anecdotes or some thoughts. For those of you who don't know me, I actually am a convert of about 23 years. I'm always proud to say I converted before I met the professor, and I came to the faith through books and through knowledge and prayer and reflection. And after a year of being exposed to sort of very conservative Wahhabi Islam, I had the blessing of meeting the professor, which completely changed my life. And this, I like to think that my life is sort of the living example of the Usuli approach that we talk about. And for me, it's extremely, confidence building and empowering. And I try to tell stories that I hope reflect kind of, a different way of thinking about things. And when I was little, I know we used to receive something called the Reader's Digest. I don't know if anyone has heard of that. I don't know if I'm like aging myself. But one of my favorite parts about the Reader's Digest was kind of like a collection of the best readings of the month. And so it would come to your house, and if you don't have time, you can read through it. But my favorite parts were the stories that people would send in. And they were like, my favorite section was called Life in these United States. And people would write in little anecdotes about things that happened to them that were sort of funny or touching or unusual. And they're just really short. But it was really fun because it was always kind of humorous and off the beaten path. And it reflected a bit of life that was, I think, life in the United States was kind of like, well, what's it like to live in Kansas as opposed to, Washington or California or New York? Because, the cultural differences were so varied. And, but it was beautiful because it still brought people together on very common, moralities or themes or, kindnesses or humor, So that's the piece that I try to add here, is to say, okay, let me tell you a few stories. And so I have two stories for you today. So the first story has to do, it's back to school night for my son this past week. And so, all the parents go, and we actually have our son, he is going to a Catholic school. And it's a wonderful Catholic school. It's not one of these ones that's strict and scary and the nuns come after you. But it's one of these ones that is very open. They are based on the Marianist tradition, which is very service-oriented. And what I loved about this particular school is that they teach a lot of what I consider Islamic values. So they really ground the kids in respect and honesty and integrity and working hard and serving the community. So kids have to do community service hours and they have to help each other. And you see it in the kids because they're really vibrant and happy, and it's a hard time because it's middle school. Middle school is not that great as things go, but when you have kind of a nice structure and God at the center of that, it's a really beautiful thing. Now, the most surprising thing about his school is that 60% of them are not Catholic. So they still have to go to Mass, and they still learn about church history and the Old Testament and the New Testament. But it was important for me to have him be in that environment because, one, there's certain things that won't happen. There's no bullies. And, you really have to be thinking about sort of, your integrity, your value system, and God. So they do prayers at the beginning and all of that. So this particular week, my son is going to high school. Oh, I'm just like, I can't believe it. It's like, where did the time go? But so they had a special thing before back to school night where we had a presentation with the principal of the high school and the principal of the middle school. And these guys are like funny, you know, they're like kind of older white guys, but they're like athletes, and they kind of have that athlete humor, and they kind of like rib each other and, you know, make fun of each other. And you can just tell that between them and the teachers and the students, there's just this energy of just like beauty and love and respect. And, you know, they are, you know, they're able to like poke fun at each other and not have everybody be like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. And, you know, they're so organized, and just, you know, the whole operation is just so impressive. So this is great. On the one hand, you know, I love seeing that and feeling like, okay, I think I made the right decision for my son. But I have to say that it makes me sad that when I see this, this is what Muslims should be doing. This is what Islamic schools should be like. You know, do we have any Islamic schools where people are so confident and passionate about what they do? They're not arrogant. They're not like people who are trying to be strict and scary and all that. They have rules, for sure. But they are so, like, convicted in their belief and so open and loving and welcoming that the whole thing is just a blessed experience. And the thing that really struck me is the dean of the academic students was talking about the parents, you know, because parents want, this is a college preparatory school, so they, you know, 100% kids are going to college. So you can imagine, you know, some of the parents that come in and they're like, well, how many kids go to Ivy Leagues? How many kids go to the this, that, and the other system? So, you know, they talked about their approach, and they're like, well, you know, we have 1,320 kids, and we have to recognize that that journey to the Ivy League is not for every single kid. And it's incumbent upon us to know there might be 1,320 different paths. And so we have to be able to accommodate that. And we work with the kids, we get to know them, you know, we have a counselor that stays with them the whole, you know, the whole time they're in high school, and we help them, you know, to figure out which schools are kind of like reach schools, which ones are likely to get in, and which ones where, okay, they'll definitely get in and probably get money because their GPA is, you know, higher than the average. So that just touched me, because it's like, you know, again, we have, when we look at the Muslim community, we have so many doctors, engineers, computer scientists. You know, the parents know where they want their kids to go. And there's not a lot of space for liberal arts, for humanities. And, you know, we've talked here many times about, you know, how do you find what you are put on this earth to do. So at the end of the information session, they opened it up to questions. And, you know, it's like hundreds of parents. And of course, I had to stand up and ask a question. That's my personality, sorry. I told the professor, and he was like laughing. Yes, of course, you would be the one to get up and ask a question. But so, of course, I wanted to ask, you know, what do you do? You know, I thanked them for that comment about, you know, recognizing that each individual has their own individual path. And I said, can you tell us what you do to help, you know, each of these kids? I'm going to embarrass my son. I said, my son is, you know, very happy, sort of shy, very comfortable, so I'm like worried that he's not going to push himself. But, you know, what do you do to help kids kind of find, like, what is their gift and what is their purpose? And how do you help them to, you know, learn how to find a meaningful life, which may not be that track to the Ivy League, you know, or something else. And they were so happy that I asked this question, which, you know, was already kind of a shock. They were like, thank you for asking that. And parents were telling me, thank you for asking that. So again, it always comes back to, can we do this in the Muslim context? Why don't we do this in the Muslim context? We, you know, we have so many smart kids, so many talented kids, so many kids that, you know, have such bright futures if they understand what their gift and what their purpose is. And that's what we're trying to do here too, is we're trying to help people understand, you know, how do you find why you are here and how do you get to that? Because, you know, as a community, if we are focused on what we're good at, and we work together, and our strengths, individual strengths, help others, you know, offset other people's weaknesses, and we come together, we will get so much farther than if we have every single kid being a doctor, an engineer, or, you know, a lawyer, or scientist. So that's my first story. Okay. Second story, the other thing that happened this week, I'm actually going to need a little assistance, so hang on 1 second. Assistance.
Oh my gosh.
Our newest addition to the family.
So cute.
This is Munchkin. Munchkin is 9 weeks old. We had a pug. Thank God she was like running around, and now she's docile. Normally she's like everywhere. But so we had a pug actually that passed away a couple months ago. That was with us for 16 years, and so it left a hole in our heart. And we were like, okay, we really want another pug. And this, seriously, it's like, you know, look at this face, right? So I just wanted to.
Don't tell me.
This is Munchkin. Hi. You're allowed to pet if you want.
I want. Okay. Hi. Oh my God.
Okay, so now I do the reveal. Come on in. And I can sit down.
How is she so quiet back there?
I know, because she was running all of her energy out before you guys got here. I was like, this is from Allah. I put her like, okay, good. I needed her to be quiet before I did my talk. Oh my God. Okay, so the reveal. This was a social experiment. I wanted to see who was comfortable with dogs and who was not. And who was like, give me that dog, I want to hold it.
Yes,
and who was like,
everyone on this side.
well, she just woke up, so I don't want her to pee on anybody. Okay. But okay, so you know, people who know me know that I'm really passionate about dogs, and it breaks my heart that Muslims are known for not caring about dogs and not liking dogs. And I can't tell you how many experiences I've had with walking down the street and I see a group of muhajabas and they're on my side of the street and they cross the street because they don't want to come near a dog. So, first I want to look at this baby. Okay, this is a creature of God. This is for me, divinity in a bundle. Pure light, pure love. This dog wants nothing except to sit in your lap and kiss you and hug you and be with you and just, charm you. And, this is like proof of God for me. And as Muslims, we have to love animals and creatures of God, and we have to take care of them, and we can't make them suffer, and we can't even draw away because it's like, oh my God, it's haram, it's dirty, blah blah blah. One of my goals on this life is to hopefully make a difference among Muslims for dogs, because how can you look at this? You don't even need Sharia if you have a heart. This creature, okay. So, but at the same time, I recognize people are, concerned about, najas and, unclean saliva and all this kind of stuff. So I wanted to point your attention to Dr. Abou El Fadl did an amazing talk about dogs, which is now circulating on the internet. And this was part of our effort. We were approached by people who were trying to put together a video to educate people in Indonesia. I mentioned this before, trying to address the dog meat industry in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore in particular, because they kill dogs, they eat them, they throw them in cages, and I mean, just it breaks my heart. So he was a subject matter expert and talked about this evidence and how we as Muslims are supposed to treat God's creatures, in particular dogs. So you can definitely, if you want to calm your heart about those issues, you can watch that and find that online. And so anyway, and I think, if you have not had a chance to enjoy the blessing of being with a dog, if you felt uncomfortable, if you feel like, nervous, you really owe yourself the opportunity to get to know a dog and to be with a dog. And you will see for yourself, they are very complex. They are just put on this earth to love you and to be your companion. They are better than people oftentimes. They're pure, they're kind, they're loyal, they love you even if you're a jerk. They will forgive you everything you do to them and still want to love you. So they're an example for how humans should be. So I honestly, would encourage you, if you're, to get a little guy like this, it's just pure love. Secondly, these dogs are amazing for creating bridges with other people, with non-Muslims. But Muslims are supposed to be at the forefront of everything good. So whether it's animal protection, animal rights, all of this sort of stuff, we should be at the forefront of talking about how beautiful and wonderful dogs are. But if you've ever had a dog and you've ever walked down the street and you've ever like come across someone else with a dog, you know what it's like. You are immediately bonded with that person over the love of a dog. And it's a beautiful experience to share something with a stranger, you know, that's just love. And, you know, even like, you know, a stupid social media example, you know, I like came across someone writing something horrifically hateful about Islam, and it was like, oh, come on, Islam is a religion of hate, and everybody knows that, and blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, who is this person? So I clicked on it, and of course, white supremacist, and, you know, just like all this hate stuff. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, he loves dogs. So maybe there's something in this person's heart that could open from the love of dogs. So anyway, I really hope, you know, I love this religion so much. I love like what I've learned about it and how it's empowered me. I'm a very different person today than I was before I became Muslim. I'm so grateful every day. And it hurts me when I see Muslims are not at the forefront of taking care of beautiful, amazing animals, or at the forefront of creating schools where other people who are not of the Islamic faith would like to be a student. You know, we need to reflect on this. What is it that we need to do to be the absolute best we can be in whatever it is? And we need to know what our gifts are, what our strengths are. You know, business people and doctors and engineers should not be teaching people about Sharia. They should stick to being doctors and engineers and whatever they do. And that's how we are going to work together and build strength upon strength and, you know, like cover a lot of ground instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. So that is my last question. I know, this is the power of a puppy. Seriously, you cannot deny the power of a puppy. I mean, there are endless stories. You know, people there, you know, if you are, you know, sick, if you are depressed, you know, people like, you know, people know. So Muslims should not be the ones that, you know, about Marwa and Rami? Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry. Switching gears again. Marwa and I just wanted to bring up again. Marwa here is an amazing rising star in, on the New York Fashion Week and in the fashion industry. And she and I had an amazing conversation that we recorded last week about, like, you know, what it's like to be a Muslim woman in the fashion industry, but further, you know, issues of, like, how women dress, hijab, you know, what it means. And just, it's out there. It's gotten a lot of circulation, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention again, and hopefully you can find it online and on YouTube. And it was a really, really cool conversation. So please do take a look if you missed it. And these guys are heading off to Princeton, so we want to wish them the best. Rami is going to be a rising star in academia. He already is. He's going to go work in Princeton with mentor of Professor Abou El Fadl, Professor Madarsi, and we're so excited. So he already has a law degree from Stanford and a degree from Oxford and a degree from UCLA. So, you know, not too shabby. No pressure, a lot of expectations for you.
I can also testify to the bridge building capacity of dogs. I didn't have any friends in law school until I got a dog.
If you want to make friends with anyone,
They also have seizure alert dogs now. They go with their guidance capability they found like they now have like guide dogs that if the person's like prone to falls, the dog will come right in front of like the person that's about to fall, or like if they start to see warning signs of a seizure, they know how to call for help too.
Yeah, and they sniff out cancer. So
They also use them in hospitals for just emotional support.
The therapy dogs.
Yeah.
they're so amazing. I mean, they're just amazing. So please do, if you're not comfortable with a dog, give it a chance, please. So, okay. That's it. Sorry.
Thank you.
No, you gotta go back.
I know, he's gonna be like crying.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I hope he's still sleepy. He ran himself
Oh,
to
maybe
bed.
this is thank you.
Before we start with Surah al Rahman, I remind everyone about the critical mission of saving Islamic manuscripts. And I brought today, I'll just share with you one example. This is one example of, alhamdulillah, a donor who doesn't want to be named at this point, an anonymous donor. We know who it is, but donated money, so I was able to save what is quite an irreplaceable treasure in the Islamic tradition. This is the private notebooks of Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi, who died in 1731. He was a very important authority, a theologian, a faqih, a Sufi, who traveled around but eventually passed away in Halaq in Syria, and left a huge imprint on the intellectual life in Syria in the 18th century, and left some very important works of theology, particularly, and theology, aqidah mostly. I actually don't know if he wrote on fiqh. I can't remember. And we did not know that Sheikh Nabulsi had private notebooks where he recorded some very important thoughts and ideas and commentary about his interactions with other shuyukh at his time and students. And they are in these little 2 volumes. And these are in his own handwriting, and his handwriting and signature have been authenticated officially. There are other texts that I brought, but I'm not going to share them at this time. Be very, very careful. If you don't trust you can be careful, then don't handle it. I'm just going to pass it around. You can, before I do it, I'll show you this. Because Rami is going to be in. He wrote, Nabulsi wrote a Sharh al ibn Mujaym, so he did write on Usul al-Fiqh. So the reason I mention this is that, again, there are so many manuscripts that are out there, and they are, you can't guarantee where they end up, because the process of acquiring them is extremely disorganized. Sometimes they're brought by libraries that preserve them. Sometimes they're brought by private collectors. Sometimes they're brought by people who don't like Islam and Muslims, and then the fate of the manuscript is pretty much disastrous. The most tragic thing is that when they're brought by dealers who rip the manuscript and sell the pages separately, they make much more money when they do that. And if you go on eBay, you can find a lot of manuscripts, including an irreplaceable Quran from the 1st century, where each page is being sold for $250. That used to be a single volume, but the dealer ripped it and is selling the pages separately. Unfortunately, you'll find that you could go to professors' offices or homes of rich people, and you'll find a page that is framed and hanging on the wall, and that has been ripped from a manuscript. So I underscore, I said this last time, I don't, if I had all the money in the world, we spent whatever money we have saved in our lives, saving as much as we can, and alhamdulillah for everything, but we just have no savings at this point anymore, because we've been doing this for 30 years. But as I said last time, if for people who are hearing me, Allah gave you the money to give to me to save the books. And you are but a tool and an agent. So help me do something that will earn you, inshallah, hasanat, and that will outlive you for centuries. The more we can save of these manuscripts, and the world of manuscripts needs a great deal of technical knowledge to avoid forgeries and to know which texts are truly irreplaceable. So for instance, there are numerous copies of Bukhari or Muslim out there, but knowing which copies have an intellectual value because they record a variant version of what Bukhari, the canon of Bukhari, is requires a great deal of training. Most Muslims who know Arabic cannot read these manuscripts, and to be able to read and authenticate takes years and years and years of training. There are some manuscripts where most of the copies perished in the Mongol invasion or in the Reconquista of Andalus, because in the Reconquista numerous Islamic manuscripts were burned. But we have a single copy of a work that survived somehow. And when it goes on the market, that's a historic moment. Now, it is my belief and that Allah watches over us, and the fate of individuals and the fate of an ummah is decided by what they do when they are confronted with these challenges. If anyone has the resources to do something and doesn't because they failed their duty, they failed the taklif. And as a Muslim ummah overall, we all suffer the collective consequences of our decisions. So again, Nabulsi's private notes, that is not, there's no other copy of this in existence in the world. And preserving it so that eventually it can be edited, published, made available to researchers and scholars is what it's all about. So this is just one example. This is one example. I was asked to sort of make a wish list. This was how many weeks ago?
It's like a few weeks ago, a month ago.
So maybe a month ago, I was asked to to create a list of all the manuscripts that, if a month ago, that were available a month ago. Some of them are no longer available. And I made, in just a matter of 1 hour, I made a list of manuscripts that came out to about $100,000. And that's even, I excluded from that list very rare copies of the Quran that goes back to the very first centuries of Islam. I mean, understand that there are all types of people that try to still argue that the Quran never gelled as a canon until the 3rd or 4th century Hijrah. And so the existence of these physical copies of the Quran that go back to the 1st century, archaeologically, it is quite critical. And when they are allowed to be destroyed in the modern age, who is responsible for that sin? I've excluded from the list even that, because some of these copies are available on eBay for $30,000, $50,000, some that are even, I can't even hope to raise that type of money. I mean, so I just omitted that from the list. this box, I brought other examples of manuscripts, but I don't want to go into them. There's manuscripts on Usul al-Fiqh that are quite rare. There are some manuscripts on by a Hanafi jurist from India who all his work had disappeared except that one book that I was able to save, and he records some very interesting Hanafi positions or fiqhi positions by Hanafi jurists in India about what Muslims in India were confronting, some of the legal issues that they were confronting, and so on. But so again, I mean, for whoever is out there, for 30 years I've been trying to appeal to rich people to rise to the occasion and do what the Quran says, which repeatedly mentions spending money in the way of God, in the path of God, as a primary obligation. And I haven't been successful, to be honest. You know, I'm not a good fundraiser. I don't kiss up to people well. I don't praise people, which apparently is necessary to raise money. I don't flatter egos, which is again apparently necessary to raise money. So I just have the hard facts as they exist. Yes, sir.
Would you consider this cause to be something that you can give your zakat or no?
Absolutely, 100%. Infaq fi talab al-ilm is the highest form of infaq fi sabilillah, and so the issue in zakah, which has been raised a long time, whether zakah can be used for jihad, and I consider this to be the primary form of jihad for Muslims in the modern age. I mean, قياسا على إنفاق الزكاة على الجهاد, and for every age, every age has its jihad, and I don't consider the jihad of today is jihad of ilm, jihad of knowledge, and you are now I'm talking about this at the very end a little bit, but I have written repeatedly, I've dedicated my entire life to, without an interpretive tradition, you cannot create meaning. Epistemology is the product of an interpretive tradition. And we are the inheritors of a cumulative interpretive tradition. Now, that the vehicle where this tradition is preserved are texts. I mean, material culture is interesting and fine and can give hints and nuance to all types of things, but the interpretive tradition is preserved in texts. And the more our interpretive tradition is deconstructed and lost, the more the very epistemology upon which we build our existence and our notion of value and meanings and normative being is compromised and diluted. So in my view, this is the core of jihad. And so I've given that fatwa a long time ago, and I continue repeating it. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, after inshallah we finish Surah al Rahman, we will start a new surah, and I want to underscore for everyone that especially tafsir and commentary on the Quran and the journey with the Quran, it's a cumulative process. We build upon meaning, and we build upon points that we established earlier. So it is important to catch up to the extent you can, to listen to the halaqas that preceded. And second, it is important that we build a community of students that I work with. So I've said this in previously, but I'm going to repeat it again. After Surah al Rahman, if there are two unexcused, or if you're going to be absent, you have to let us know. If there are two absences that you don't communicate about and that we don't understand, I'm going to ask Grace then to remove you from the list. And I'm going to be very strict about that because I don't care about numbers. I'm not into a popularity contest. I care about building partners in a journey of meaning with the Quran. And I cannot build this partnership if I don't have consistency. And I've said this before as well, that I interact with your aura and I read your aura. And your aura often directs the nuances of emphasis in this journey. And so aura consistency is very important. Your aura itself will transform as you take this journey with the Quran. I don't need to tell you that this is, by the way, on our part, is a major commitment. I was up till 4 in the morning yesterday, again, because you can never have enough reading or chasing after certain ideas and so it's a major commitment, and it is part of the adab of talab al-ilm that your commitment would, at a minimum, match the commitment of the teacher. Okay. So, Surah al Rahman, like many other surahs of the Quran, in many ways, it can be a companion for your entire life. And if you learn to acquire the basic meanings, but then allow these basic meanings to be a groundwork upon which you build a lifetime of reflection, and often a dialectical relationship, because you will, as you travel, you journey in life with the Quran speaking to you, you'll have sweet moments and you'll have rough moments. You'll have moments of tension and you'll have moments of resolution. But Surah al Rahman is designed to be a companion for life. And as we said before, Allah starts with this remarkable, magnanimous term, Ar-Rahman, alerting all of us to the fact that nothing unfolds in life, no good, no beauty can be without the self-disclosure of Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman, the merciful, the compassionate, the very nature of the one creator of all things and the giver of all meaning that everything is premised on. Now, it is not just immutable and endless and eternal, but the nuances of that one word, Ar-Rahman, are endless in every sense of the word. And then, as we said, that then comes very quickly, Allama al-Quran. Quran, Halaqa al-Insan, that taught the Quran. And we talked about the foundational premise that the surah sets up at the beginning, and creation, and then the critical step for creation, and that's the mizan, the balance. The Quran alerts you from the very beginning that the mizan, the balance, and your ability as a human being to strike the balance through a dynamic of interacting with the Rahman, the compassionate, the merciful, the giver, the self-disclosure of the beautiful and magnanimous. And that balance, in its essence, depends on a duality. And that duality will be the theme throughout Surah al Rahman, and we've talked a great deal about that. So the duality between good and bad, night and day, sweet and sour, the duality between heaven and hell, the duality between morality and immorality, and so on. And it's a foundational belief because, as we talked about, that we human beings are tried throughout our existence by shades of being, that we often are put through situations where we doubt the existence of an absolute good and an absolute bad. In other words, we are forced to, the nature of doubt itself is that we start believing, well, maybe everything is relative and everything is contingent, and there is no absolute, and there is no objectivity to anything. And in a remarkable way that we've talked about now at length, that the Surah al Rahman comes and alerts you to that and challenges you to the awareness that no, you do have a grounding and you do have a foundation, and that foundation doesn't waver. The absoluteness of a foundational good and an objective good, as well as the opposite of it. And again, we've talked at length about that. And then this duality is maintained throughout the surah, as we've said, and then with a remarkable and powerful description and summation of created life, of life in the material realm, and the finality which comes from the end of life in the material realm. And you are then confronted with the absolute declaration and absolute realization and powerful reminder that when all's said and done, the only thing that remains is the face of your Lord. And we've talked at length about what the face of your Lord means. وجه ربك. And then after this powerful commentary about life on earth, addressing the hereafter, and from عالم الوجود لعالم الشهود, from عالم الشهود والوجود إلى عالم الغيب, the world of the unseen and the world of the unexperienced and the non-material. And we talked about the finality and the absoluteness of, in Surah al Rahman, in Allah addressing the punishment and the negative consequences of unjust and evil deeds. And then we reached the point when Surah al Rahman switches, as throughout the Quran, whenever God talks about hellfire, God talks about also the opposite of hellfire. And then the duality is also maintained in talking about just results. And as we said last time, this remarkable expression, جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان, affirming the equation of cause and consequence, affirming the equation that it is the law, the nomos of God, the law of creation, that good cannot be treated, or the reward of good can be nothing but good. And we talked about the fact that there are three ayahs in the Quran, and this was, I think, last time, that has long engaged Muslim theologians and Muslim interpreters and Muslim researchers throughout centuries of cumulative interpretive efforts. One of these ayahs is هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان, can the reward of good be but good? And we also talked about the fact that this ayah's impact went far beyond the field of theodicy and far beyond the field of aqidah and belief, to a huge impact in philosophy and also a huge impact in law. It even became a canon of law in re-articulated and reconstructed terms. The other two ayahs, of course, open a whole other field of research and a whole discourse that is quite extensive. وَإِنْ عُدْتُمْ عُدْنَا, and so on, which I talked about last time. Okay, so now I'm trying to remember when we stopped last time.
65.
Yeah. Okay, now let's remember again that when talking about Jinan, the dual form of Jannah, and as we said, most theologians said a higher Jannah and a lower Jannah as juxtaposed in Surah al Rahman and elsewhere in the Quran. And we also said that some even said that there are 4 Jannahs by name, and we talked about that. But I want to remind you of the parallel structure in these 2 Jannahs that are referred to in the Quran, so that when, for instance, and we again talked about that last Halaqa. So when we get to verse 66, someone read the translation.
In them each will be 2 springs pouring forth water in continuous abundance.
Yeah. So فيهما عينان نضاختان, the juxtapose this to the earlier discussion of the first Jannah, فيهما عينان تجريان, and we've mentioned this, that the 2 Jannahs seem to parallel it. So one is مدهمتان, the other is ذوات أفنان, متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق. Then it's paralleled متكئين على رفرف خضري على رفرف خضري على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان. So this parallel structure is maintained throughout, and if you go back to your translation, compare. So for instance, find the parallel to verse 66 in the description of the first Jannah, and just reflect on the way the 2 Jannahs are paralleled in descriptive terms. But this doesn't need to detain us for our purposes here, as much as simply unpacking the various discourses upon what these references in Surah al Rahman are. So فيهما عينان نضاختان. So the first first layer of meaning, which is the methodology that we've followed throughout so far, is that ayn, it's clear enough. It's a spring, a source of goodness. That is even the word for eye, which in Arabic also we use the same expression, ayn. The reason that ayn is called the ayn and eye is called an eye is because it is thought that this is the medium by which you can achieve perception, and a perception is a source of goodness. And so the Arabs use the same word for a source of spring of goodness to describe also the eye that is in all living mammals through which they see things. And al-Daha is something that flourishes through its own, without needing an outside source of energy. So, now, can you use, but it has always the connotation of well-being. So you cannot say a volcano is an addah. Why? Because a volcano, although it bubbles through its own energy, or at least without outside energy, its lava emerges from underground through its own natural forces. But because a volcano is destructive, we cannot use the word naddah for a volcano. But we can use the word naddah for ayn, because an naddah by the nature of the word is always a source of goodness. Okay. Now, so the first layer of meaning is that in that Jannah, in the same way that in the first layer of Jannah we have a source of flowing goodness, aynan tajriyan, in the second, or in the lower level of Jannah, there is a ayn as well. There is a source of goodness that is naddaha instead of tajriyan, that bubbles instead of flows. Now, for many of the literal mufassirun, like Ibn Kathir, for instance, they said, well, it must be, and we confronted this methodology previously. They said, well, then it must be that Allah knows that a spring that flows in the first level of Jannah is better or is higher than a spring that bubbles. And they stopped there. They said, well, it's Allah telling us that a spring that flows in the first level of Jannah will be more conducive to ecstasy and happiness than a spring that bubbles. Ayn naddaha. For a further layer, and as I consistently said throughout Surah al Rahman, that one layer of meaning does not exclude another, but it is a further layer of an understanding, with some like Jilani or Ibn Arabi, of course, who is his own school of thought when it comes to Surah al Rahman and other surah. In the same way that in the first level, the description of aynan tajriyan, flowing springs, they argued that it does not just connote water springs, but it connotes the flowing of wisdom, of hikmah ilahiyya, the flowing of the satisfaction of, or the resolution that a human being achieves of attaining finality of knowledge and attaining partaking in divine wisdom and divine knowledge that in the first level, you partake in the self-disclosures of the divine and in the hikmah al-ilahiyya, in the divine wisdom, to a much higher capacity, to a capacity in which this wisdom literally, as if it's flowing throughout your intellect and throughout your being. They argued that with aynan naddakhatan, it is a lower level of attainment of al-hikmah al-ilahiyya, of divine wisdom. So you are not overcome in the sense that this divine wisdom and the self-disclosures of the divine flow through you as if in a complete state of unity, but rather they are available to you for those who wish to partake in al-hikmah al-ilahiyya al-mutanahiyya. So Jilani says فوارتان منتهيتان إلى بحر الحكمة al-ilahiyya, and so on. So that, and what's fascinating again is that they said, well, aynan naddakhatan, through normal linguistic usage, we refer to water and springs. But is it necessarily so if you analyze the words and take out the usage, the normal usage of the words, and look at them as words that open vestiges of meaning, open up possibilities of meaning? And he said, well, it's not necessarily not wedded to water, but it's rather wedded to the idea of goodness and idea of wisdom itself. And so the refrain comes immediately after that. So how can you deny the bounties of your Lord, or how can you deny the gifts of your Lord? I thought we talked about فيما فاكهة ونخل ورمان, we didn't?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Okay, so that's 68. فيما فاكهة ونخل ورمان.
We kind of skipped around.
Okay, we talked about this.
We skipped around.
But we didn't talk about Nadakha.
Oh, I didn't talk about Nadakha. Okay. So فيهن خيرات حسان did we talk about that? We talk about فيهن خيرات حسان?
No.
Okay, so I think we left off at 68. Yeah. فيما فاكهة ونخل ورمان, because we talked about
the dates and the pomegranate because of the verse before of all types of fruit, and then you were kind of correlating it to what would come later.
Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit.
To that point, but we didn't leave off at 68.
Yeah. I mean, the main thing we've already skipped ahead a little bit when I talked about fruits and palms and rumman, and now I remember. And we talked a bit about Qurtubi, for instance, who was one of the major mufassirun of the Quran, or commentator of the Quran, who talks about why nakhl and why rumman, why palm trees and why pomegranates, and he says, well, it's because the Arabs thought highly of these fruits. Now I remember. And that raised the possibility of, is the Quran addressing human beings, describing an actual physical manifestation of fruits, palms, and pomegranates in the hereafter, or is it simply connoting goodness, using what people would find familiar and meaningful to them? So we talked about that. And we also talked about the whole class of mufassirun who said that nakhl could also symbolically has an important meaning, in that it represented fruit, while pomegranate represented nourishment and medicine, in a symbolic reference to the enjoyment of goodness, enjoyment or luxury, as well as absolute goodness of health. And then the third layer of meaning, or the further and I don't think I got into that, which said that nakhl wa rumman, palm trees and pomegranates, is عطف الخاص على العام. I'm going to translate this. Okay, we don't need to translate عطف الخاص على العام, it's not important. But it's كناية عن الاعتناء والاهتمام, that they argued basically it's not that Allah is promising you actual palms and actual pomegranates, but rather that Allah is communicating a state of completeness and well-being and is a level of caretaking that is symbolic, or that connotes repose and tranquility. And I think I referenced that when in the first layer where it says فيهما من كل فاكهة, that in the first layer that when the Quran says that there will be of every fruit, and then when it comes to the lower level of Jannah and it says that it doesn't say that there will be of every fruit, it says that there will be fruit and there will be palm trees and there will be pomegranates. Everyone follows? Mm-hmm. First level, second level. And then those who paused at this and insisted on saying, well, why? What does that variance mean? Why in the first level it says min kulli fakiha, there is of every fruit, and then in the second level it says that there will be fruit, there will be palm trees, there will be pomegranates, and they argued that consistent with the theme of the first Jannah being those who covet, their reward is al-hikmah, their reward is knowledge and wisdom in and of itself, that every fruit means every just deserve and every just reward for their coveting of knowledge, coveting knowing. While in the second level, it will be people that have mixed good deeds with bad deeds. They are not people who have, and we talked about this last Halaqa, not people who necessarily longed for the divine or loved the divine. This is reserved for the first level of Jannah. The second level of Jannah will be people who obeyed God out of a sense of desire for reward or fear of punishment. So it is not that they longed for the companionship of the divine, but rather their journey during their lifetime was a journey of mixed confidence with skepticism, belief and disbelief, good deeds and bad deeds. And therefore, their treatment, or what they get in the hereafter, is consistent with that. They get a level, and this is the third layer, which still insists that you will not necessarily, fruit will not necessarily be physically fruit in the hereafter in the way that we have come to know fruit, life on this earth, but rather that fruit could be a level of satisfaction or a level of well-being consistent with the way you've led your life in this world. Okay, I think I also skipped ahead when we talked about حور مقصورات في الخيام. حور مقصورات في الخيام. I didn't?
What's the translation?
72. Can someone read the translation?
Companions restrained as to their glances in goodly pavilions.
Are you sure I didn't?
You
referenced
it.
Yeah, I think so. Because the main, I think I mentioned this point last time, that the main issue here is the first school, which is in the modern age a dominant school, the school that all Muslims that you encounter in your daily life at least I mean, where I grew up, it was not the main school, but I have come to I have come to the realization that maybe where I grew up was not representative as to Muslims in the modern age, because I grew up with people who got their knowledge from books and manuscripts, and but anyway, so I mentioned the I'll call it a debate, or the two perceptions, the two views. The traditional literal one, which predominates in the modern age, that it's talking about the reward of men in the hereafter, and that men will be rewarded with virginal maidens, and these virginal maidens will be, as what was appealing to Arabs at the time, women sitting in tents, and when these women are shy, so their gaze are lowered, it was particularly sexy. The image of erotica in a lot of Arabic poetry is the image of a woman in a tent that is that is shy and virginal. And the more virginal, the more shy, the more erotic. And so, and that tends to be, am I right in saying that that's a meaning that most Muslims would understand this to mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So, yeah. And that the parallel to this we've already encountered in the first Jannah, right, is that كأنهن الياقوت والمرجان. So similarly, as we talked in the first level of Jannah, that the issue becomes, is it, so the first layer of meaning is that they're talking about rewarding men with women. The second major school of thought, and I mentioned that one, is that it is not talking about the reward of men being rewarded with women, but rather describing the state of women in Jannah. You remember that, right?
Yes.
So it is in the first level of Jannah that all women who make it to the first level of Jannah, they come to that Jannah in a state as if they are Yaqut wa Murjan, that they are, and as we said, that why Yaqut and why Murjan, because it is representative of absolute lack of flaw. And not physical, but spiritual and intellectual. They come in their absolute envisioned form, and I think we've already talked about that in the first level of Jannah. The second level of Jannah, and I mentioned that it was extremely desirable at the time for Arab women that if they come back, as their reward is that they come back virgins. Because a virgin was considered to be a woman of great power, not just desirability, but maintaining your virginity was considered a special status within a tribe, within a qawm, within a group, and whether true or not, a lot of a lot of Sufi masters, a lot of women who led, especially the Khawarij rebels, would claim to be virgins. Now, one of them who I wrote about in my Rebellion book years ago because I became sort of fascinated with her. There were reports that this woman had married 3 or 4 times, and yet there were poems praising her virginity. That has always puzzled me. How could she have married 3 or 4 times, and yet all these poems by her followers, who were, of course, rebelled against, especially the Umayyin, how could these poems that go on for 20, 30 verses talk about how she is as pure as the Maryam, the Azra, the Virgin, and that she has never been touched by either man or jinn, and so on. Anyway, that is a topoi, that is a type in pre-Islamic and Islamic culture, and it lives for many, many centuries afterwards. So that's the second school, or the second layer. Before I move from the second layer, any questions?
Maybe they're talking about the spirit, the spirit, the virgin spirit, not the virgin physical virginity.
No, that is inherent within the second school, and actually it's a good thing you brought that up, because there is actually there is a I didn't bring the book with me. I should have. I was just looking at it yesterday. It was one of the things that we went to get from the library, because I wanted to look at further at this point. There was a nice passage which says, you know, do these women in the second level of Jannah come with Ghasha al-Bakara? The what? Hymen, the version. And they said, no, that's not what it's talking about.
Yeah.
It's talking about that they come with the state of a virgin, which I thought, for some reason I just didn't bring it with me.
When you were talking, that's how it struck me.
Yeah, I mean, so that's, I wanted to make, I had remembered that I read it, and I went to the library yesterday and I was searching for it, and then I found it, and alhamdulillah. So I reread it, and so, yeah. But there is a, you had a question for
Yeah, I was,
the third level.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask about the definition of the word hur, because when I've looked this up in Arabic English dictionaries, Arabic dictionaries, it seems to imply like a contrast between like the white part of the eye and the dark part of the eye. So I don't know how is that like a gender specific like thing?
No,
like that's something that's related, like,
no,
okay.
No.
So how does one get companions from that?
Yeah, because that's actually a good question. Hur, it comes from the word hawar.
Yeah.
And hawar is literally, it's the white of the eye. And within the meaning of that, it's especially the contrast between the white of the eye and the color of the pupil. And that contrast is what it is often referred to as hawar. Now, from that, there was a further development in that word that permeates Arabic poetry, pre-Islamic Arabic poetry, and that from hawar, and I should mention, also hawar occurs in pre-Islamic poetry several times to refer to a slight deviation in the eye, where it's a slight crossing of the eye, not completely crossed eyes, but where you have the eye and one of the eyes deviates, like goes its own direction. Now, for whatever reason, that was considered very attractive for Arabs. When it occurs with women or men, it was considered very erotic. I have to say, even where I grew up, I knew a woman, she was Syrian, who had that. And it's very interesting because I never thought about it till now. Everyone in our area considered her extremely good looking because she had that little hawar in her eyes. So, yeah, very interesting.
But this is a measure of beauty for everyone. I mean, it's known as one of the measures of beauty for the eye, the regard, the look. You know how you look. It's known. It's not only the Arab.
Interesting.
Medical pathology.
Because someone told me that here in America it's considered ugly.
Oh, no. In Europe, definitely, it's considered like they admire it.
If you have like a slight...
yes, a tiny bit, not much, you know. But it's,
interesting.
A tiny, because it's like always you're dreaming, you're like a little bit lost, you know, like in a cloud and a smoke.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
if this question is too loaded, let me know. It's just something I kind of struggle with. With what you were saying, okay, like with back then, there was a certain type of image of what a virginal woman looks like, right? And what's considered sexy back then, right? So if those like standards have changed up until now, then it's like I'm kind of confused on like how do we know for sure if like the kind of standards for like what virginity is and so on in the Quran uphold now.
No, it's not loaded. I mean, it's something that we talked about, and inshallah we'll continue talking about, because it goes back to the heart of the interpretive process and the engagement process with the text and the hermeneutics of the text and the process by which you extract meaning from the text, and to what extent the text accommodated contingent epistemologies or existing contextual epistemologies, and to what extent then, and how do you, what are the rules for engagement and the dynamics of engaging in hermeneutics and producing meaning from the text of the Quran. I mean, of course, I've written on that extensively in Reasoning with God. It's a 600-page small print study. But that's also at the heart of what the entire interpretive tradition is. So I don't want to go on a, because it will take us, because I've already talked about this and we'll continue talking about it, but it will take us to, what is the word?
Tangent.
A tangent. Yeah, it will take us to a tangent, so I won't address it now, but you know, that's exactly what the whole hermeneutics of the Quran involves.
Dr. Khalid.
Yeah.
I heard and somewhere, you know, like about the description of Hur al-Ain, that in Jannah, actually when we are reborn or resurrected, in Jannah, we're not going to be like the same as we are here, women and men, but we're going to be like a being that is like in complete satisfaction and happiness, regardless of whether it's woman or a man. Like it's a completely different story.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if you.
Yeah, this is again. It goes back.
So it's
to,
not a reward. I mean, that's what I mean.
But that's
not rewarding men with virgins.
That's what I've talked about that in the previous halaqa.
I'm sorry, I was not here.
And so, and let us just, so we don't get too lost in tangents.
Okay.
So let's stick first with finishing the word whole. Because from Hawar, the Y to the cross and the I, and then to the evolution of the word hur, from Hawar to hur. And hur in pre-Islamic poetry is often refers to anything that is hasanatul wajh, anything that looks good.
Yeah.
Now, so, and there are numerous examples in pre-Islamic and early Islamic poetry of hur meaning anything that has an attractive face. Then a further development, we actually do not quite sure at what point, but hur at some point, we find it in, so for instance, in the poetry of Abou El Fadl al-Ma'arri, he used the word hur to refer to heavenly female beings, something like angels. So we know that at least by his time, it has become accepted that hur could also mean, in addition to something that has a beautiful face, could also mean heavenly beings that are, we assume, of course, through the institutions of patriarchy, that they must be very good looking to men, because men just assume that if the Quran talks about something good looking and feminine, then it must be something very attractive to men. So now,
is it assumed to be feminine because it's grammatically feminine, or
no.
oh, it's just
No,
it's just this.
hur can be masculine or feminine,
Okay.
depending on the context. So now, so this is the word hur, outside of context, outside of usage itself. So then, hurun maqsuratun fil khiyam, is it, as we said, first school said means women that are a word for men. Second school said, no, it refers to women who have nothing to do with men, but women who are make it to heaven, and they come into a perfected form, into a beautified form. That's the best word for it. Third school, which, and this is where you find people like Jilani and similar Sufi-oriented Mufassirun, said in the same way they argued that in the first level of heaven, that the reference to فيهن خيرات حسان, that the reference is not to women. They insisted that this one in the second level is also not a reference to women. So, for instance, when they came to maqsurat fil khiyam, maqsur. So let's break it down. Hur is one word. Maqsur is something that is limited in something. Qasar al-shay is something that is broken out and limited in something. And then khiyam usually refers to tents in normal usage. Now, if you put it together, hur, maqsurat fil khiyam, is it necessarily referring to human beings or beings at all? Well, people like Jilani said, no. Bal, and here I'm quoting from him, أي مقصور كل منهن على من أتى من الأعمال الصالحة والأخلاق المرضية لا يتعدى إلى الغير إذ كل نفس رهينة بما كسبت خيرا كان أو شرا. So people like Jilani said, you're getting it all wrong. It's not talking about women for men, and it's not talking about women and their rewards. Rather, it's talking about hur means good deeds in themselves. In other words, whatever the moral satisfaction that a human being will receive, the Quran is telling you to each will be rewarded according to the extent of their own deeds. Pair their deeds. So again, مقصور كل منهن. How many of you, by the way, understand that? Just saying. Yeah. كل منهن على من أتى بالأعمال الصالحة والأخلاق المرضية. So each of them is rewarded in proportion to the extent of, in direct relation to, the good deeds that they've done. Now, this is a complete mind twister. Because here, and this is what completely is, modern Muslims have completely lost from their tradition. So, hur has nothing to do with sex, has nothing to do with erotica, has nothing to do with women. Hur has to do with moral value in itself. And what moral value you attain, Jilani tells you, well, what you're going to get is in direct relation to what you've done in your life. Maqsurat means no one will get more than they deserve. So just because you are from X family, just because you knew whoever, just because of whatever you thought in life on this earth entitled you to more than your just reward, well, that's not the way it's going to work, even in that second level of Jannah. So now you ask here, so wait a minute, so maqsurat, we can understand that because maqsurat means limited to. So good deeds limited to. But how about khiyam? How does someone like Jilani understand khiyam? Because normally it means, khiyam means a tent or a cover or something that is encasing something else.
Protection.
And here, some of the most fascinating commentaries on the Quran, on the word khiyam, it says, khayma by its nature is something that limits something else, something that separates something else. So, and as usual in Quranic commentary, you read some of the most fascinating poetry using the word khayama or khayyama without the context of a tent. In other words, without reference to a tent. So even in Arabic that is not medieval, we say khayyam al-jaysh means the army camped, right? So it has become defined to a location. So maqsuratun fil khiyam means it's as if the deeds or your proportional good deeds or your proportional rewards will be in limited, it's as if packaged, they will come packaged, specially to each person, individually, as to that person and what they've done. Now remember, we talked about that one of their major arguments, the third school, is that the self-disclosures of the divine, when I say self-disclosures, I mean tajalliyat, that when your knowledge of the divine, your relationship with the divine, your relationship with Allah, is individual to each person. And as we said in last Halaqa, that at the time was quite revolutionary, because at that time, what dominated was the Zoroastrian Church in Persia, which still had survived for centuries, even after the Muslim conquest, and the Catholic Church before long before the Reformation and the birth of Protestantism, and the idea of the divine not being negotiated through or being mediated by a holy, specially sanctified class, because the divine was, and even the idea of idols, it was, the reason idol worship was so widespread is that it was always thought that you need intermediaries between the divine and the human, and that it was inconceivable that a human would be able to interact with the divine without some type of mediation. And the revolutionary idea at that time, although now we take it for granted as if it always was that not only is a mediation not necessary, but that the mediation runs counter to لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى, that no one can stand for another, but furthermore that you come to God in the hereafter, and what you're confronted with is a full record of your own personal individual relationship with God. Now, what posed quite a challenge, even centuries after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, is the Quranic discourse that your mother, your father, it will not avail you, your children will not avail you, that even mothers will lose connection with their children and so on. the idea that there is the record of deeds and just rewards is disconnected from your tribal affiliation and family affiliation was quite radical and quite unsettling for, and in fact, I mean, it still springs back and forth because I've encountered in Sina some tribes in Sina that still insisted that their long grandfathers mediate for them was God, and they offered sacrifices to their grandfathers, which by the way surprised me because Islam had been anchored with these tribes, and this was before, of course, the current tragedy that's going on was the warfare between the tribes and Sina. When I visited, it was actually in a very very friendly and amicable occasion, and it was a tribal adjudication on a dispute between two tribes, and so I got an opportunity to learn a lot about their customs and practices, and very fascinating. Not that I'm doing propaganda for our journal, but Frank Stewart published a very good article many years ago about the law, Sharia law amongst the Bedouin tribes of Sina in the UCLA Law School, a journal of Islamic and Near Eastern law, which I started about 20 years ago, if you're curious, anyway. How did I get into the tribes about Sina?
By your family and your...
Oh, your family, yes, thank you. So, yeah, I was surprised that although they've been Muslim for centuries, they still believe that you sacrifice because your grandfathers will anyway. But the idea was quite revolutionary and continued to be so for many centuries, even after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So when I read commentaries like Al-Jilani that insists on maqsurat fil qiyam, that it's an individual package of specific and individual rewards for each human being, when I put it in its historical context, it's quite a mind twister. If you've read enough history, you realize the extent to which that is against the grain of history, which, I mean, is a testament to the power of the Muslim civilization itself and the power of the intellectual movement in the Islamic civilization. Okay, so then we come to 74. Can you read the translation? Of course, we have the refrain first, right?
Yeah, which of your Lord's bounties do you...
So how can you deny the bounties of your Lord?
Whom no man or jinn before them has touched.
Okay, so لَمْ يَطْمِثْهُنَّ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ. So the first school has no problem with the meaning of that. It says لَمْ يَطْمِثْهُنَّ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ means what? No human beings or jinn have had sex with them. Simple, pure, straightforward. Because these are virginal women for men. Second school says لَمْ يَطْمِثْهُنَّ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ means women who make it to that level of heaven come in pure form, uncorrupted. Now here, yatmas, tamasa means, tams al-shay means to cover something. When you go like this, that's a tams, right? That's a tams al-shay. Tams al-haqiqa is to cover truth or hide truth, right? Now, so how did the first school get from to cover something to sex? Because they say لَمْ يَطْمُثْهُنَّ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَانٌ means no humans or jinn had sex with them. Well, because in Arabic usage, tams al-shay could mean cover, but it has also been used in Arabic poetry to be a kinaya, to be a word descriptive of, symbolic of the sexual act. And so consistent with that, not literally means a sexual act, but symbolic of the sexual act. It was a conception that the sexual act is as if something
It's like a,
that...
like a euphemism?
Euphemism,
Okay.
yeah, euphemism. So the first school said, well, it's that's actually a good word, euphemism for that human beings, neither humans nor jinn had had sex with these women, and that's why their virgin or pure. Second school said, no, comes here does not have any sexual meaning, it means uncorrupted. Now, it is curious, by the way, that among modern Muslims, every modern Muslim that I've talked to have always understood this ayah to mean sex. Although, if you look at the Arabic, that's not the natural meaning of it. And that tells you the power of modern culture, because we ourselves, especially, I mean, patriarchy took, and patriarchal interpretations, especially when we introduced standardized educational system, governmental educational systems. So now, what you're taught comes from the government, and who controls governments? It's men. It's very different than the pre-modern world, where education is done by private institutions. And so meaning is communicated through many different privately endowed zawaya, meaning centers of education. And each zawaya could have its own tradition of meaning. And we often forget that the modern age is viciously standardizing. Some philosophers refer to that as cosmopolitanism, the cosmopolitan movement, that urbanization has a standardizing power. One of the and this is especially for people who are, because I know that a lot of students that want to go to the Islamic studies field watch these halaqas. I appeal to these students, humble your arrogance, because a lot of students go in thinking that the epistemology they inherited from their modern age is the inevitable epistemology upon which they project backwards on the Islamic tradition. Just because you have had that intellectual experience, it doesn't mean that that's the intellectual experience of the Islamic tradition. That's your experience. That's your epistemological experience. With enough education, humility sets in. With enough reading, if the longer you live with texts and the longer you read, the longer you explore the depths of meaning and nuance in history and in human production, generally, but especially with Islamic tradition, the more you realize that whatever you started out with was sheer fantasy, dictated by that you are very much a subjective agent, a product of your time and period, in the most remarkably humbling ways. You know, again, I say this for all the students who are going to be going into Islamic studies. The Islamic tradition is vast, and take a deep breath before you enter it, because it's going to take you for a ride. And the longer you persist, the more wild your ride is going to be. Okay.
I'm sorry that you were comparing before and after to the zawiyat.
Yeah.
But the zawiyat also were run by men, no?
Yes, but the difference is, it's a difference between patriarchy and patriarchy. You know, patriarchy in which the government issues hierarchical orders, and in patriarchy where, so for instance, in one of the most interesting zawaya I visited in mosque in Egypt, it was in Masjid Rab'a al-Adawi. Rab'a al-Adawi. Why?
It's okay.
No, I mean, I think my memory is exhausted today, but Rabba al-Adawiyya, one of the before the whole thing was Sisi and the whole massacre that happened there. It used to be that and Mulid al-Rab'a al-Adawiyya, they would come all these Sufi orders, and they camp before the mosque at Rab'a al-Adawiyya, and they do their tuqus, their various Sufi performances. And among them, especially before the mosque of Rab'a al-Adawiyya, were several ones that headed by long-established Sufi orders in Egypt, headed by women. So this was in 2009, I think. So she gave me Kitab al-Dhikr, one of her copies of her Dhikr books written by one of her students. So anyway, I had an opportunity to go with them for a while. These were the good days. And talk to her and her tradition and her masters and her teachers and so on. And what was remarkable is, what struck me in talking to this woman was that how she saw the entry of public education. Because I've always taken public education as granted. It's public education, how people become literate and how they become educated, and so I've always thought of it as good. But from her perception, from her perspective, public education was the major disaster that befell Egypt.
I agree.
That that was the time that the worth of her teachers and her tradition and became denied because these people in the government, and one of her complaints was that the government would not give her permission to perform with her tariqah inside the mosque at Rab'a, but would limit them to outside the mosque. She believed it's because her tariqah is led by a woman. At the time, I knew Ali Guma and we were friends, and I asked him if that was true, that that's why they denied her tariqah permission to perform there, and he said no, it has nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman, that her tariqah, their performances are very loud and disruptive and so on. Anyway. Yeah, very fascinating. So my point is, لم يطمسهن إنس ولا جان قبلهن ولا جان. When you put it in when there's a hermeneutical framework that then takes it away from sex and sexual relations, and says that, well, what, 3 layers, we talked about the first, we talked about the second, but then the third, that not only does the just reward in terms of al-haqa'iq al-rabbaniyya, divine truth, comes proportionally packaged for each individual according to their deeds, but these truths that come to you come without the influence of the interventionary influences of human beings or jinn. Now there is a side debate as when it says jinn, does it refer to jinn influencing truth as received by human beings, or is it talking about jannah to jinn, meaning a jannah for human beings, a jannah for jinn, and truth uncorrupted by jinn for jinn, and truth uncorrupted by human beings for human beings? Or is it talking about truth uncorrupted by human beings or jinn for human beings? In other words, the old debate as to whether jinn can intervene in the lives of human beings and play around with their emotional state, psychological well-being, etc., etc. Of course, that's a debate that we will not resolve. Modern mind tends to not want to believe that jinn can intervene. I don't mind telling you that I'm from the school of thought that tends to believe that jinn can intervene.
I think so too.
Whatever you want to believe is between you and Allah, and that would become your maqsoora in the hereafter. because whatever you believe is what your package that you get in the hereafter. مخيمة لك, it will become prepackaged,
But
especially for
sometimes the
you.
human being even intervene in a way of the results.
Human
So
beings,
how can
yeah,
that change?
Anyway, yeah. My experiences of life have I started out very skeptical about the influences of jinn, and then I migrated. Okay, so then the refrain, right?
Yeah. Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?
Okay, and then the verse that follows.
Reclining on green cushions and rich carpets of beauty.
Now here, the reclining متكئين على رفرف. The متكئين means to recline. The whole hermeneutic dynamic, or the hermeneutical dynamics that take place when this particular ayah is these teasingly ambiguous, open-ended, but marvelously magnanimous words. Rafraf, khudrin, abqari, hisan. If each one of these words you can pause at and reflect endlessly. Now, why is that? Rafraf al-shay could refer to couches and pillows. When you refer to a shelf in Arabic is what? Raf, right? Why is it raf? Does anyone know? What's the root word of raf?
It moves.
A shelf, what's the root word?
Rafa.
Rafa.
Yeah.
Was it fat mushaddad,
Yeah,
right?
Rafa.
Now, it's something that can rest. That's a rafu shay, is something that can rest, but is also unstable.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable. It's something that if you are resting on something stable, it's a busat. If you are resting on something that is by its nature unstable, it's a raf. So you say rafaftu shay means I've organized it on something, but it is not necessarily stable. Basattu shay means I've stabilized it, I anchored it. So rafraf, now the word rafraf does occur outside the Quran, although it is with kalimat al-mu'jama, kalimat al-ajam, it's not, that word rafraf is not considered an Arabic word. But it occurs outside the Quran in one poem, one pre-Islamic poem, in which it refers to clouds, which is fascinating. So commentators paused at this. The first school said, well, we know that when Arabs, especially coming from Persia, brought back from Persia pillows that are stuffed with ostrich feathers, and that they referred to that as, I don't precisely remember the classical Persian word, but it sounded like lafraf. I don't know, do any of you know? It's not modern Persian, it's classical Persian, which differs quite a bit. And so a lot of commentators said, well, so it's referring to resting on cushions. However, so the first school, since we're always doing first school, second school said these women, the virginal women who are awards for men, are going to be continuing on with the erotic image. They're going to be laying on couches and cushions, which is consistent with the erotic image throughout. Second school said no, that women will come in the hereafter, part of their reward, so it's not referring to the women for men, it's referring to the women for women. In other words, for themselves. So they will come resting on, and here it is, so متكئين, the عائد على ماذا, it refers to what? It refers to the rewarded woman. على رفرف, that they come resting on, again, whether these pillows are material and physical or simply symbolic for something connoting comfort and luxury, that's the old debate between literalism and figuratism among Quranic commentators. We come to the now there is a little twist, and I can't resist the temptation to go into it because, I mean, it's an added complexity, but you should know about it. That word خضر وعبقري, خضر, because خضر usually refers to something that is green. So if they are resting, which means vegetation, normally. So if they are resting on cushions and luscious pillows, how could these luscious pillows be vegetation? You should know that the third school often referred to or often argued that that is precisely why the interpretation to متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان cannot refer to couches and pillows. The first school, this is the erotic school. I don't mean it's not.
It's okay. It's a good.
Yeah, you know what I'm getting at. The one that most Muslims accept today, right? Yeah.
The sexy one.
Yeah. It says, well, no, it's telling you that these cushions are going to be pleasing to the eye, not just as wonderful as being in a garden, but they're going to be special types of cushions where, although they're cushions, unlike vegetation in which you attempt to lie on, they'll spike you, they'll hurt you, they'll scratch you. In the hereafter, they're going to be soft and luscious. So you lie on gardens and it will feel like you rely on pillows. And what the Persians, what travelers to Persia brought back to the Arabs, ostrich-filled pillows or feathers of ostrich. Okay, so that's the first school. Second school said that that's too literal. And when it says women who come rewarded, what it's saying is that they will come resting on khudr here doesn't mean, according to the second school, doesn't mean necessarily something that is vegetation, but refers to another sense to the word khudr. And it actually, you know, the Quranic figure Khudr, who was anyone who doesn't know who Khudr is? Al-Khadr. Al-Khadr is the one who Moses interacts with, and Moses travels with for a period of time, and he is lost, and so on and so forth. So he's a... Now, Khadr, it was used and become adopted as a name, as a word that connotes anything of rejuvenated source of beauty and goodness. A rejuvenating source of goodness is a khadr, or khadr. So, in one of these tafsirs it says, الأخضر هنا مخضرة بباء الجمال والإيمان والإخلاص واعتقاد الحق, which is, I'll translate in a second, but which modern Arabs, again, is not the epistemology in which they're raised. So, where it still was the second soul. So they rest on zones of comfort. If you would translate Per the Modern School, instead of the translation that you've read, it would be resting on spheres of comfort, of zones of comfort, of rejuvenating goodness. وعبقري, and here we pause. Al-Abqar is anything of incomprehensible beauty, and anything that is incomprehensibly dazzling. The roots of this word is fascinating. All the Arabs, pre-Islamic Arabs, believed that there's a town in Yemen called Abqar, and that this town is insanely haunted with jinn. I found it, of all places, the book is actually here. It's a book called Ashraf al-Yaman. I actually found a reference to that town, or at least a description of where it is geographically. So I don't know. Apparently it's a real town. I don't know. According to Ashraf al-Yaman, it exists. Now, of course, if Allah wants to give me a gift before I leave this world, is that I visit this town. But anyway, so it's supposed to have been insanely haunted, and because it's insanely haunted, Arabs associated with jinn the ability to perform things that are incomprehensible to human beings. And from that, the word Abqar was born. Now, what's interesting in Arabic usage, when you refer to a genius, you say Abqari, right?
Yeah.
And so Abqari is a person who can think in a way that is incomprehensible to others. That's why we call them Abqari, because they can have thought processes that are incomprehensible to others. Now here, when it says Abqari al-Hisan, how did this guy translate Abqari again?
Of beauty, reclining
Of
on
beauty.
green cushions and rich
Because
carpets of
it
beauty.
doesn't. Abqari Ihsan, if you would do a literal translation, it would be incomprehensible beauty. Or beauty of, incomprehensible, unimaginable beauty. That would be a literal translation. So, here, when it says Abqari Ihsan, according to the first school, the first school, so Abqari Ihsan, Atf ala mada, it's referring to what? It says that it refers to what these women are resting on, right? That's the first school. Second school says, no, it refers to the state in which these women who are being rewarded come and find a state of being that is incomprehensible, unimaginable to what they've experienced to life. In other words, it's nothing that their imagination can preconceive, but it is of unadulterated beauty. Third school, because the third school is always fascinating in its sort of, says no. Here, عبقري متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان, that when the reward comes, and we said that each reward comes packaged per your deed. The reason that when it referred to the first of Jannah, it says فرش من استبرق, juxtaposed عبقري حسان على رفرف عبقري حسان. That in the first level, those who are being, and remember, in the third school of thought, it's always talking about those who are being rewarded genderless, whether they're men or women. So in the first level of Jannah, they rest on a stabrak, and a stabrak is, as we said, is something of magnanimous luminosity that the unadulterated truth, unmitigated and unhampered by anything. This is the first level of Jannah. In the second level of Jannah, they argue that the rest, ala rafraf, means that they will rest on beauty that is still, it's still Jannah and it's still a reward, but they rest on beauty that is proportional, that is not absolute, because they never become privy to the self-disclosures of the divine in the absolute sense. They only, remember, the second level of Jannah are for those who never fell in love with the divine, never lived coveting the divine. They only lived a life in which duty, in which there is fear of punishment, in which they do good sometimes, they do bad sometimes. So their attainments of the truth is never absolute, and it is never unadulterated, as opposed to the first. However, it's still something that going to the disclosures of beauty that they attain in the hereafter is still going to surprise them, because they lived life on earth never going beyond materiality. And when they see the truth of materiality in the hereafter, what everything that we see and touch in a material world, when they see the truth of it, what it really is, for what the truth of it in the hereafter, that's the abqari hisan, that they will be dazzled, then they will be shocked, and they will be surprised. Because unlike the first group saw through the fakeness of materiality already before they died. And so there is no abqari hisan for them, because when they already know the fakeness of the materiality, and what they will rest on is istabrak, an unadulterated revelation of the truth, and that's the divine self in all its all the divine's magnanimity and beauty. While the second group have never exceeded the limits of materiality, and so the shock comes when you actually see materiality for what it is. You know, we get some levels of attainment through modern technology. If you look at materiality through certain light prisms, infrared, LED light, and you see the way that it shows you space, the way it shows you, for instance, a couch and bookshelves, another human being, whether it shows you regions of heat, nothing but heat, or it shows you, it reduces it to certain points of lines and a spectrum light or something like that. You know, I've always wondered, and this verse always occurs to me when I've looked through these spectrums, through the mediums of modern technology, and I'd say, you know, when I put one of these things and I look, and I get that little surprise of abqari hisan, through modern technology. Is that a little taste of what this verse is referring to as revelation? Okay, then the refrain again. So, how can you deny the bounties of your Lord? I want to get to the very last verse, because it wraps it up and ties everything together. So what?
Blessed be the name of thy Lord, full of majesty, bounty, and honor.
Okay, now, تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام. And here we have to pause, because the way it starts with Al Rahman and ends with Ism Rabbik is the name of your Lord, ties this entire surah in one cohesive whole, and the entire duality the mizan and the duality and the narrative and everything. Now, before I do that, though, I remembered one thing. When the third school comments on Abqari al-Hisan, it often has the expression لا يتبعها قبح ولا خذلان. That one of the great rewards in the hereafter is that you are, for the first time, although you lived a life of material existence and material attainment, you can in material existence you can never enjoy anything good without a share of lack of good, or no good comes without bad. Nearly everything comes, whatever good you enjoy comes with. So even every minute in your life, it brings you closer to death. Every consumption, it has various. While in the hereafter, the Abqari Hisan is for the first time good, not mixed, not mixed with qubh or khuzlan, in meaning that nothing bad comes with it. Just as a because I remember that the third school always has that language when they talk about Abqari Hisan. So now the refrain, so how can you possibly deny the bounties of your Lord? And then the very end. So what is the conclusion of all of this? So praise be the name of your Lord. The name that it refers to, A'id ala Rahman. So it reminds you back again that all of this, even, and this is if you want to read some of the Kalami works especially, has some very fascinating material. Books of Kalam need training. If for graduate students who don't read works of Kalam without being trained to read them. But if you have the opportunity to train to read them, jump on it.
You will train us?
I need to train graduate students because I would, without being able to punish people with bad grades, otherwise it becomes too. But because I know a lot of graduate students listen to these halaqas, and so that's why I'm saying this. In our day, in today's world, an opportunity to be trained to read manuscripts is more rare than gold and diamonds, and an opportunity to be trained to read works of Kalam is more rare than the most rare diamond. So if you have an opportunity, jump on it. Don't waste it. You'll regret it later on in life. They're professors. I mean, they're professors who know how to do it, but it just depends on whether you happen to be in a university where there happens to be a professor who can train you to read this material. Because it's very technical, and my experience is that those who don't train with a professor, it's very difficult for them to train afterwards, and when they try to mess around with this literature without training, they create a mess. Absolute mess.
But what is words of
unadulterated
Kalam?
Mess.
What is words of Kalam? That's like a whole body
Kalam
of...
is a discipline. It's a
to read
technical...
the word?
No, it's works on
Theology.
theological disputations.
Okay.
But it developed into a very technical linguistic usage. It's like philosophy. It employs very specialized language. Like law, it employs specialized language. And so words in that field mean things that they don't mean in normal usage. Anyway, the reason I had mentioned the field of Kalam is that when they Tabarak ismu Rabbik, that so praise be the name of your Lord the Rahman. Words of kalam often get into the issue of that it is the nature, is it merciful to have heaven and hell? Heaven we can all understand, it's reward, but how about hell? How can hell be consistent with merciful, the compassionate? And here's where kalam gets in defending the idea or explaining, indeed, that the very fact of just reward, which involves negative reward, negative punishment or negative consequences, as well as positive consequences, is essential to the very essence of the balance of the mizan. And the mizan is essential for the very nature of rahmah, of mercy itself. So in other words, it is quintessential for the very idea of compassion and mercy that there be consequences. And the consequences including negative consequences, as well as the positive consequences. And that's where you find the whole discourses of kalam. But aside from kalam, assuming you already believe in Ar-Rahman, regardless of, even if there is hellfire, that is still part of the nature of Ar-Rahman to punish as well as to reward. So, glorified be the name of Ar-Rahman, the sustainer of the balance, the creator of the balance, the creator of the duality, the creator of the entire dynamic. The Jalal, al-Jalal is the epitome of beauty. Jalal has often been described as a word that connotes al-Jamal, the Jamal of the Lord, the beauty of the Lord. والإكرام القادر والمقتدر على وجوه الإنعام. Al-Ikram is the one who is able, without limits, to bestow, to give goodness without limitations. So the nature of the Rahman is beautiful and is one who is capable of giving goodness without reservations and without limits. Now, often when you get to this point at the end of Surah al Rahman, the takeaway conclusion, which has often intrigued me, is that often commentators come here and they say, so we remind people of Allah's revelation, لا ييأس من روح الله إلا القوم الظالمين, that those who despair in the Lord, or those who you should not despair in the power of your Lord, or in the forgiveness of your Lord, or in the mercy of your Lord. And if you do despair that the Lord can forgive you, or can be merciful enough to shelter you in that mercy, to bestow this mercy upon you, despairing in the mercy of your Lord is an act of injustice. Now, I've always been intrigued by that, because by the time we reach the end, the refrain that they always remind you of is that if you truly understood that the name, this is the most compassionate and the most merciful, that is the creator of all things, and the face of truth in its absolute and unadulterated sense, and that behind all of the shades and shadows, as one of my favorite commentators puts it, that the truth behind all of these shades and shadows in which we live and which we persist, you know, one day takes us up and one day takes us down. One day, you know, makes us feeling good and in good spirits and confident. Another day we're in the doldrums and we are down and so on. But if you anchor yourself in the truth behind the shades, you know that the truth is the face of the merciful, who constantly calls you to observe the balance, to balance yourself, literally, in a literal way. And that the seekers in the road, the seekers in the road is an expression of art, those who travel seeking their Lord, often of a Sufi lineage, by the way, when you say seekers on the road. But not necessarily just Sufi, but the path of those who seek the Lord, the greatest of the greatest mystics didn't achieve what they achieved except through one art, and that's the art of the balance. They learn to balance themselves. They learn to balance their moods. They learn to balance their ego so that they're not jubilant and humorous in a vain way, but they're also not dejected and worthless. That art of the balance is the art of the truth and the art of the path of the Lord. And it's also at the heart of the meaning, kunhat al-adl, that it is the meaning, the very heart of justice, and the very heart of beauty. I've written the entire Search for Beauty in Islam. If you search the book, if you search the Search for Beauty enough, I put in little clues that I bury throughout the text about the relationship between the balance, justice, and beauty. That beauty is but a relationship of proportionality. The very essence of beauty. It's nothing more than proportionality and a state of equilibrium. And that is why in the last refrain, or the last reminder in Surah al Rahman, it comes back and reminds you that if that Lord that gave you the beginning of the story and that will receive you at the end of the story is a Lord of beauty, and that should anchor your search. Because it's a Lord that loves beauty and that rejects ugliness. Now, Surah al Rahman is a journey. I mean, for those of you who haven't heard this before, Sharif said the story, which is actually quite literally true. Maybe I should, no, I'll say it. No, I won't put you on the spot. That he's been asking me, he's been chasing me for 6 years. Yeah. He had read Surah al Rahman when he was in Egypt. He fell in love with it, and he kept asking me to give him, tell him what a tafsir on Surah al Rahman, and I've been putting him off for 6 years. And I keep telling him, you're not ready for it. Now, partly it's my own laziness, but partly Surah al Rahman is a journey, and it's once you open the surah and you delve in it, there are two things. You either go by, and that happens to quite often. But I mean, because I love my son, I didn't want to put him before the challenge of having met the surah and possibly walked away from it, because I worry about his hereafter, to be quite blunt, and what that could mean. And I did it now because he wore me down, to be quite honest.
Let's not be honest.
Yeah, but, and he's ready.
You know he's ready.
Yeah, but I have been literally, I've, you know, a lot of things have I've journeyed with the surah up and down throughout my life. That jalal wal ikram, and journeyed with the unfoldings and the disclosures of the God of beauty. It doesn't seem to have an end, and it is a journey that would, like everything in my sincere conviction is that if Muslims embrace the Quran, it's a transformative experience, not just for individuals but for nations. I mean that opens a whole. Let me stop there, since I'm holding back on a lot of things that I would want to say in a different company, or maybe in this company if we journey long enough together. But because I'm holding myself back, I'm stuttering, because that's what happens when your brain thinks certain things and then you have another layer of your brain that says it's not time to say these things. Hold it. So that you end up stuttering.
I have something small, something.
Let's take a break and pray also. It's been over 2 hours, and then.
Oh, it's been over 2 hours already?
Yeah, and we'll pray also, come back, and then we'll do questions.
This is the thing, is that once you start talking about the Quran, I don't feel time, and I just don't feel time.
I think that's a good sign.
Yes.
But it's sometimes hard on people. Oh, yes.